Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. We're going to give people a couple more minutes to join us, and we will get started promptly at 6:30. Hey, it looks like the participation is maybe plateauing. I'm sure people will join in the next couple of minutes. But again, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight for our class of 2024 post-secondary planning webinar. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Heather McVeigh. I'm the director of the guidance department, and I'm really pleased to have with me tonight three of our guidance staff. We're a staff of 8 total, and 3 are here presenting tonight. So as I introduce you, maybe you can just wave your hand. I have Miss Julie Horner, Miss Abby Leon Murphy, and Miss Kate Ryder. And thank you for joining us tonight. One of the things I think we've learned from COVID is the idea of having these webinars and making it as convenient as possible for families. I know as a parent of 2 teenagers how challenging it is to get our children to events and attend things related to school. So I hope you can appreciate the fact that we're doing this and you are comfortable in your kitchen, perhaps making dinner or on your couch. And for those of you who have friends, neighbors who can't attend tonight, we are recording this and we'll post it to the guidance website next week. So as I mentioned before, we are a staff of 8, and some of us have been here nearly 25 years. Our youngest counselor has been here just 2, but we have a really nice working relationship amongst ourselves. We really work collaboratively to make sure the information we're delivering to students is consistent and timely. And I'm just really proud of the work we do and the professional development that we undertake to make sure that we are current in our field and assisting families as best as we can. You will notice that there is a chat feature enabled. Although we won't answer questions tonight, we will be taking notes on the questions that arise. In addition, on the last slide, there is a Google form that you can fill out that will be live for the next few days. With any outstanding questions, we will look at that next week and then put together a document that lists the questions that came up with answers. So I would expect that we would have that up next week sometime on our website as well. So we segue into the agenda for tonight. I've done some introductions. We're going to talk about college admission trends that we've seen post-COVID. We're going to talk about the application process, the nuts and bolts, what you really need to be paying attention to over the next couple of months, the various roles and responsibilities of all of us as a team, collectively, as guidance staff, as parents, as students. We're also going to talk a little bit about alternatives and other options. The focus tonight primarily is on four-year college, but we are aware and want to be here to support all students and talk about the 2-year technical school route, as well as other alternates to post-secondary, other options for post-secondary plans. We'll then segue into a little bit about athletic eligibility with the NCAA clearinghouse. That's going to pertain to a select few people, perhaps, really for Division I and II athletes. And then a little bit of financial aid. And as we learned today, that landscape is changing as far as deadlines and availability of forms as of today. So we'll talk a little bit about that later on. So what have we learned? I, for one, have been doing this for this is my 24th year. I've been through a number of admission cycles, application cycles. And prior to COVID, I thought we had it down pat. COVID threw us for a loop, and as it did admission counselors, and all of us have been paying particularly close attention to what the outcome or what the trends have been after COVID as it relates to the impacts on admissions. And as you can see here, there was a survey of admission leaders from colleges really across the country. And what the number one thing we're seeing is the increase in applications across the board. For example, UMass Amherst received, that's supposed to be 48,000 applications last year, which was a record-breaking number. And we in guidance hear this every single year, the record-breaking numbers of kids who are applying early action, the low admit rate because of the number of applications. So this is something that has become a trend, and part of it, and I think a large part of it actually, is that this idea of test optional or test blind admissions has really impacted that. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. But essentially what that means is kids are now applying to more schools because of the SAT optional idea, meaning that they might not have the SATs to apply to a school like Harvard or Yale or Boston College, but where those schools aren't needing those for the admission process anymore, they're throwing their applications out just to see what might happen. And so admission counselors are in a position where they have many more applications to read through. So that's really been, in my mind, the absolute number one trend of the impact of admissions since COVID. The other thing is they're really recruiting more minority students, transfer students, first generation students, meaning students who are first in their immediate family to attend college. And there's less recruitment for part-time students. They're really trying to build their student body with full-time students. There was an interesting article that just came out earlier this fall that I linked there through Forbes magazine, and it does a really nice job of going into more detail about other trends. But, you know, it's just a resource for yourself, highlights some of the things that I've said and gives more examples. So I wanted to draw your attention to that. Other trends that we're seeing, an increase in applications for early action and early decision. I've highlighted those terms. I think Julie will talk about that in a few minutes, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't want to get into the lingo and what they mean just yet. But again, I do want to emphasize that early action and early decision are for very specific students. It is not for everyone and is not meant for the mentality around let's just get it done early. And I think Julie will speak to who it's appropriate for, but that has been a real trend that we've seen is just getting these applications out early to get it done. And that's really not the rationale behind that. The essay has become much more important because SATs are not a factor. So we encourage the students, and I know they're all working on it right now in English class, but the time will pay off. The time, the frustration, the stress will pay off in the long run because college counselors are really, really paying a lot of attention to that essay. What separates your student from every other student applying? And so that has become much more critical. This idea of demonstrated interest, also called DI, has become vastly popular, meaning students who show more of an interest in a college will probably have an advantage. And I think Julie will also talk about that. Shake your head, Julie, or do you want me to go through that now? Me? Okay. So for example, students who open emails from a college, right? I know my daughter is a junior and already she is starting to get emails. I ask her if she's interested in a school, please open the email, read the email. There's algorithms designed, it's far beyond my capacity to understand, but there are algorithms that will track that. So opening emails, emailing an admission counselor, to ask a question, trying to find out who the representative is for our school, attending colleges. I'm trying to think what else. Looking at their website, for example. Again, algorithms can track that. So I think you get the idea that it's not just simply applying to the school. There is some real thought to demonstrating this interest for a variety of schools now. And the other thing I will say, and I've said it for 23 years, please make sure your student's social media is appropriate. Make sure they are private and not a public account. We have heard time and time again where college admissions officers are looking up students on Instagram or YouTube or TikTok or whatever else exists in the world of social media, and they are using that, and oftentimes they're not pleased with what they see. So please make sure their accounts are private, that their screen names are appropriate. The other point is emails. A lot of students developed emails perhaps when they were in late elementary school or middle school, so their emails aren't mature, if you will. So encourage them to change them to simply their name at gmail.com or something like that. The other thing I just want to talk a little bit about is the mental health through this process. What we know is that it is extraordinarily stressful for students. It's extraordinarily stressful for parents, especially if this is your first child going through the process. So there's just some little tips that I've kind of learned and heard other professionals say throughout this process. I won't necessarily go through them all, but I just wanted to highlight some things that I thought might resonate with you as you go through this. I will highlight the last bullet where I want everyone to know that this is an individual process. Every single student's process will be different. It will be different from your older son or daughter. It will be different from your niece or nephew. It will be different from your neighbor. That's okay. It is so easy, and I hear it in the halls. I see it in classes, kids talking about deadlines, who's applying when, have you seen this college? Really, we need to stay focused on the individual student and not turn to our side and ask our neighbor, or physically in a classroom, or our neighbor in our neighborhood perhaps, but just focus on the individual process, that this really is meant to be. And it is very difficult. I acknowledge that. So while I said earlier tonight that our information tonight is really geared on the application process for four-year colleges, I don't want to lose sight that there are many, many options for students. We have seen an increasing number of students over the past 2 years taking a gap year, which I am a big supporter of. I think it allows students to explore interests and really dig deep into what they may want to do, and maybe learn that they don't want to do that. So I do think gap years have some significant importance for a lot of kids. We also have seen many more kids go into the workforce for a year or two before they go back to college. So I don't want to lose sight of these options. We are going to talk about 2-year benefits of a 2-year community college and a technical school in a few minutes. There's also the route of military, service-based learning, and then certainly some travel programs. I had two students last year look into travel through a travel company. I think it was EFC. I can't remember the name of it. I will, but they were looking into traveling the world for a year and taking a few college classes here or there internationally in hopes to transfer those when they came back to the United States. So lots of options. We are seeing many more students go in different routes, which is really important. And we are here to support students with whatever they want to do. So I want to reiterate that as well. Okay, so before I turn it over, I just want to make sure I covered everything I wanted. And I believe I have. So I am going to turn it over to Julie Horner, who will take you through the actual application process.
Hi, everyone. So my next couple of slides are going to go through the college application process, like Heather said. So you can really use these slides as a checklist for yourself and your student. To reiterate what Heather said, everyone is in a different place right now. So some students might be just beginning this checklist, and other students are going to be almost at the end of it, and that's perfectly fine. We're going to meet students wherever they're at when we meet with them. So we began meeting with seniors this week, and we will continue doing that for the next several weeks. In their Google Classroom, their guidance Google Classroom, we posted a meeting request form. And so we're asking students to fill that out just to kind of give us a sense of where they're at. And then from there, we will schedule a meeting with them. So if you can encourage them to complete those forms, that would be great. So at this point, students are hopefully beginning to finalize their college list. They're thinking about those factors they identified as being important for them, identifying schools that match that, and making sure they have a well-rounded list. So they want to make sure they have schools that we would call safety and target schools. So safety schools, schools where we're confident they would get in based on the averages for that school. Target school, they're probably right at the averages. We think they have a good chance. And then certainly if a student wants to have any reach schools where maybe they're below the averages or that school is just a little more competitive, they can always have those as well. Once they determine their list of schools, they're going to think about what deadline is going to make the most sense for them. So there are a couple of different deadline types that I will go through. The first one being early decision. So this deadline type is a binding commitment. So that means if I apply early decision to a school, I am committing to attend that school if I am accepted. So it is a serious commitment. A student can only apply ED to one school. And if they were accepted, if they had applied to any other schools up until that point, they would be withdrawing all of their other applications because they're committing to go to that school. So if a student decides to apply ED, the family really needs to be comfortable with their ability to pay for that school. Every school has what we call a net price calculator, which helps a family get a really good sense of how much aid they would receive at a school. So if a student is thinking of applying ED, the family should go through that process and make sure they're comfortable with that amount. Benefits of applying ED would be that acceptance rates from early decision pools are higher. So might have a slightly higher chance of admittance if you're a good candidate for a school. That would be the key thing. As Heather mentioned, we have seen an increase in the use of ED by admissions in building their class. And a lot of that, like Heather said, is due to receiving so many more applications. It's hard for colleges to predict who is going to actually enroll at their school. So the power of ED for those schools is that that is a guaranteed student who is coming. So that gives the college a lot of control. So for example, schools like BU and Northeastern have accepted about 50% of their incoming class from their early decision pool. And so we don't say that to scare you or to promote ED in any way. We just want you to have a sense of what's out there, what the landscape is like. And it's a question you can be asking schools. How many students are being accepted from each of your applicant pools? So that is early decision. There is typically two different deadlines you might come across. Early decision 1, early decision 2 would be later in the year. Early decision 1 earlier in the year. Early action is applying earlier in the year and getting a decision earlier in the year. So typically those deadlines would be November 1st, November 15th, and students might hear back right around winter break before or after. As Heather said, early action is certainly not for everyone, and it's certainly not just to get your application over with. And that's because the application that's going out is going to include a transcript through the end of junior year. So students really have to be comfortable with where their grades were at, where everything else is at through that point. Every school also approaches early action a little differently. And so for example, URI is a school that would encourage students to apply early action because if a student is maybe on the borderline of being accepted or not, they will defer that student to regular decision if they just want some more information. So applying early action to URI would make sense for that kind of student. But for that same student who's maybe on the border for a school like UMass Amherst, they do not defer students from early action. They only accept or deny. So there's definitely some thought that goes into whether early action is the right decision at each school. Something to be aware of, some majors might require early action, such as nursing. So that's something to be aware of too for when you're thinking about deadlines. Regular decision is for deadlines typically in the wintertime, January 1st, January 15th, February 1st. So that's going to give students more time to get applications done, more time to do more testing if that's something they're interested in. They definitely have their first quarter grades available so schools can see how they're doing in their senior year for those regular decision deadlines. Rolling admissions is when a school does not have a hard deadline. They just review applications as they come in. And typically a student would hear back about 3 or 4 weeks after submitting an application to a rolling school. So your student has their schools identified, they have a sense of when they might be applying, and they're going to be working on their applications. So one of the common applications a student will come across is the Common App. It's accepted by hundreds of colleges, so it's really convenient. It can save a student a lot of time because they fill it out once and they send it to multiple colleges, maybe all of their colleges. So there is a main section on the Common App that would go to every school, and then each school is going to have a couple of their own questions. We have a Common App guide linked here that students will have access to when they meet with us as well. That helps them answer all of the questions. It's really important, especially post-COVID, that students are really thoughtful about how they answer each school's questions. If they ever come across an optional question, we always tell them, like, don't view it as optional, view it as required. Your choice to not complete that question says something to the school. So always complete all questions. Another piece of the application that they might come across is called the SSAR, or the Self-Reported Student Academic Record. And this is basically a college wanting the student to self-report their transcripts. So there are links here to tell you which schools require them, and a link to the website where the student completes it. Some popular schools with our students who require the SSAR are UConn, URI, University of Delaware, Penn State, Rutgers, but there are several more who require it as well. Another part of that application is the college essay, which Heather talked a little bit about earlier. So students are working on those in English 12 classes. Again, post-COVID, now that schools are test optional, more emphasis is put on the essay. So it is an important factor. Students should be spending time on it to make sure it's a good, solid piece of writing, and it's a topic that is meaningful to them. Some information we've gotten from admissions counselors around the essay is to avoid cliche topics like the big game. Make sure the essay is about the student and not about somebody else. And colleges want to know, what is the student curious about? What do they think about? How do they work with other people? How do they overcome challenges? That kind of information that might be hard to gather from other parts of the application. Important that the student, has people reviewing it, editing it, but also really important that the essay maintains their voice, as colleges can pretty easily tell if too many hands have been on an essay. Some schools will require supplemental essays, so it's important that a student is getting a sense of that kind of early on so that they can make sure they're budgeting their time well and planning out when they can complete any additional essays they might have to write. Each school is likely going to have an application fee associated with it, and that can range from $50 to $100. And so that kind of ties into making sure your student has a thoughtful list of schools, because that can add up really quickly. Some schools might offer fee waivers if a student visits the school or does an info session. We also have fee waivers available for students on free and reduced lunch, so they can always reach out to us to access those. Another part of the application are letters of recommendation. Some colleges do not require teacher letters of recommendation. Others will require 1 or 2. So we ask that students do not ask for more than 2 teacher letters. Sometimes students will want to have an outside letter of recommendation from a coach or an employer. And if that's something they're interested in, they can work with us to talk about the best way to get those sent out to colleges. We also try to remind students to write thank you notes to their teachers for writing them a letter. As teachers do that in their own time, they're not obligated at all to write letters. And your students counselor will also provide a letter for them as well. Their high school transcript is another piece that will be sent off to colleges. That's their high school record. It says the classes they've taken and the final grades they've received. And it's really important that students just talk to us in person 5 days before their earliest deadline so that we can make sure we have everything prepared and we're getting everything out on time for them. SAT and ACT scores, as Heather mentioned, schools have continued to be test optional post-COVID, and we've seen over these past couple of years that there really is no negative impact on students who choose not to submit their scores. We recommend that students only submit their scores if they are at or above the averages for a school. Otherwise, submitting is not going to add anything to their application. If a student does choose to report their scores, they're going to need to check with the school if the school will accept them self-reporting their scores on their common application or their application, or if they need to send an official score report through College Board. And that link tells you which schools accept self-reporting scores. Some additional pieces, as I mentioned before, early action deadlines will not have their Q1 grades available yet. Typically, our quarter ends after early action deadlines. But with that being said, we will send out Q1 grades when they're available to early action schools. And we do that just in case schools are waiting to see them. So we send them to all of them in case any are looking for that information. Mid-year grades are sent by request only. So around early February, we'll put a form out to students. If they need their mid-year grades sent, they will let us know. Auditions and portfolios are relevant just to students who are thinking of doing art or music, theater, dance. It's really important that they check with each school because each school can handle that very differently. Some want students to submit their applications before they can schedule auditions or submit portfolios, or vice versa. So they just want to check each school carefully to see how they handle it. And then the last piece, interviews aren't required, but are sometimes an option for students at schools. If your student feels like they could represent themselves well in an interview, we definitely recommend they take advantage of that. It's another point of demonstrated interest, like Heather spoke about earlier. It's just another point of contact with someone at the college showing your students interest in the school. So I am now going to turn it over to Kate, who's going to talk about kind of who's responsible for what in this process I just went over.
Hello. So as we've heard from Heather and Julie, there's a lot to this application process. So I'm hoping these next few slides really define what your students should be doing, what we're doing, and how you can support them so there's less confusion. So it's the student's responsibility to know and meet their deadlines. We will try to assist them in this, and as they share their deadlines with us, we obviously take note of that and we try to make sure that they are staying on top of it, but it's really their responsibility to know when their applications are due and to fulfill that. Every student is required to meet with their guidance counselor to talk about their fall plans for next fall. And this might coincide with their senior perks. So your seniors are allowed to leave campus first period, last period, lunch period if they have a directed study. We are not meeting with your seniors during class time. We're going to meet with them during a directed study, even if it falls into one of those periods. So we've tried to communicate this to the students that they're expected to come to these appointments, even if it coincides with a perk. But we would love it if you reiterate that message at home as well. Because unfortunately, if they miss a meeting with us, they are then going to fall, later in the list, and we might not be able to see them for a couple of weeks. As I believe Julie mentioned, there's a meeting request form in Google Classroom that helps us know who's ready to have the conversation and helps us prepare those conversations, as far as knowing where they're applying and when. Requesting transcripts and Naviance is something that we'll go over with each of the students during those individual conversations. While we send the transcripts, students are required to request those, just so we know exactly where they're applying. There is a questionnaire in Naviance. Many students completed it last spring, but we've relabeled it the junior and senior questionnaire for those that are going to complete it this fall. This helps us write our letters of recommendation. We've been building a personal relationship with your students over the last 4 years, but there's always things in their high school experience that we're not privy to. Maybe there's lessons they've learned along the way that they want to share that really inform us more about who they are as a person. So that questionnaire just really helps us when we're writing our letters of recommendation to round out the picture and helps us really, brag about your kid. Also, there's going to be college visits listed in Naviance. Those are up and posted. Your student can go into Naviance and register. This is where a college rep actually comes to Franklin High School and they do a little presentation. They engage with the kids, they ask questions. This is another great way for your student to show demonstrate interest. I believe there's a limit where they can only do 5 visits because we don't want students constantly getting out of class to attend these visits. But they should be really thoughtful and selective so they can see the entire list of Naviance of the schools that are coming. Select 5 that they want to attend and register for those. I believe you have to register at least a day in advance so we know who's going to be showing up. And then finally, your students are responsible for submitting applications, including test scores. So as we're submitting materials for your students' application, your students submitting the application themselves or the application itself. And the timing of this doesn't really matter. If your student's ready to submit their application October 1st, but I haven't finalized their letter of recommendation or I'm waiting for the school profile to come in, whatever it is, your student can submit their application. If they're ready, it is before the deadline, they are welcome to do that. And then their guidance counselor will submit when their materials are ready as well. And again, we adhere to the deadlines. So as long as your student submits their application and includes those test scores, whether it's self-reported or the official score report, then they have done their duty. This is just a series of links to help answer potential questions you have, little resources that we share with parents and students, for example, how to complete the questionnaire, how to register for the visits, etc. Some of them are videos, and we recorded these videos a year or 2 ago because it shows us kind of navigating the Naviance platform. Unfortunately, Naviance updated their layout over the summer, but the series of clicks and steps to get to these places are still the same. It looks a little different, but there's still, a main tab with links underneath. So I encourage you to still use this, but if you have questions and you're a little lost or confused, reach out to your student's guidance counselor. Here we just have a list of dates of common deadlines and when that your student should be communicating with your guidance counselor at the latest. So a lot of students applying early action are going to have a November 1st deadline. If you tell us on Halloween, we will do our best to get your materials in on time, but it's really important that we have more time than that. So if you have a deadline of November 1st, your student needs to let us know by October 25th. And then we just kind of laid out, the common deadlines and then 5 school days before them. You'll notice a date like January 1st as the deadline. 5 school days before that is December 18th, which seems a lot earlier, but it's because during Christmas vacation or winter break, just like you're spending time with your family, we are spending time with ours. So we want to give ourselves that time during the school day to help your students apply. And now here's your shining role. Oh, Heather, you just flew right past it. Wait, did we skip one? Oh, was counselor next? Sorry. So counselor's role, sorry about that. So we are responsible for giving direction, support, advice, information, and that applies to your student and you. So if you have questions, you can reach out to your student's guidance counselor. Part of this is making sure that your student does have that balanced list of schools. We are going to make sure they have a safety, they have target schools. On occasion, we do have students that come to us with all reach schools, and we are ready to have that honest conversation to make sure we're not setting themselves up to have a disappointing spring. So we will guide them through that process. We have the individual sessions with students. We're going to meet with them a couple times in the fall, but we can meet with them as much as they need, really. Sending transcripts, letters of recommendation, and supporting documents all comes from us as well. That's why it's super important that we have an accurate list of your students' schools. So sometimes students will have a list in September of the schools they want to apply to, but maybe as the semester goes on, they add some schools, they remove some schools. It's super important that they keep their guidance counselor updated because we are responsible for sending these important documents over. There we go. Okay. So this is your shining moment. What is the parent responsible for? Emotional support. So I know that this is a really stressful time for you. It's also a super stressful time for your student. So being there for them, guiding them, giving them the confidence that they can do this. The reality checks. So Like I said, we're going to make sure that your students have a balanced list, but it's also helpful to have that conversation at home. We want to look at the admission statistics, look at your student and see, okay, are we likely to get into some of these schools here? And financial piece is part of that as well. School is super expensive. So depending on your family situation, you want to be paying attention to those price tags, keeping in mind that there are financial aid opportunities, scholarship opportunities, but there is that big hefty payment. Regular reminders, we want your students to be responsible for knowing their deadlines and adhering to their deadlines, but they are still maturing adults. They are teenagers, so they might need a little bit of help with that. So those friendly reminders of, hey, did you fill out that meeting request form for guidance? Or, oh, you know that November 1st deadline's coming up. Have you finished up your essay? Honest communication kind of ties into all of that. There's no sense in hiding things or trying to like, I don't know, not be honest with your student during this whole process, because it just makes it a little bit easier if everyone's on the same page. Finally, that is a link to a parent brag sheet. Nobody knows your students as well as you do. So you can use that as an opportunity to tell us the amazing things about them that we might not know yet. And once again, it's just a piece of information that will help inform our letter. So you will be able to access that and fill it out as needed. And you can just send that to your student's guidance counselor.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ms. Ryder. So we're going to be discussing athletics and academic eligibility with Division I and Division II sports, with the focus on sports through the NCAA. So at this point, your student should have registered through the NCAA Eligibility Center if they're planning on playing a D1 or D2 sport. If not, the link for that is listed right on the slideshow, which is going to be shared with you. So on the NCAA site is the detailed information related to the recruiting process, academic requirements needed in order to play at the D1 and D2 levels, and information on the National Letter of Intent, which is the final stage of the recruiting process. So with collegiate sports, athletic scholarships are awarded at the D1 and 2 level. Transcripts, they do get updated regularly by our administrative assistant and guidance. So attached to this slide are the academic eligibility requirements for Division I, II, and III. So switching gears, we're going to be discussing cost-effective opportunities for higher education. So a community college is a great option. So at the community colleges, there are many opportunities, one of which is to earn a certificate, which is often completed within a shorter period of time. The certificate program can provide opportunities in skilled trades such as HVAC, plumbing, and electrical work. Certificate programs allow students to learn a new skill, often in less time than a 2-year program. So there are many careers that require a 2-year degree, including a paralegal, registered nurse, and cybersecurity specialist. Although 2-year programs are typically less selective, healthcare majors and automotive programs tend to be competitive at the community colleges. So I wanted to share with you a specific selective program outside of the automotive and healthcare majors, which is the Bristol Community College Culinary Arts program. To get into this program, there's the requirement that students have to attend the information session in order to be accepted. So the big takeaway from me sharing that information with you is just to be mindful of the requirements for the program. So even though the 2-year programs are, less selective, just be mindful of the information on the site. Technical training schools are another great career path. So some of these types of schools, they include New England Institute of Technology in East Greenwich, Rhode Island, MTTI in Seekonk, Mass, and even Tri-County Regional Vocational Technical High School that's here in Franklin. So they offer adult education programs. Some of the factors to keep in mind for the community colleges and training schools is the distance between home and school. and the other costs that are involved, so such as the living expenses and gas for the car. So your students' goals are another factor that we really have to consider in what path that your student should potentially take. Community colleges and trade schools, they're a great opportunity where students are able to start a job after school and even further their education at a four-year college. So we just want to send a reminder that the trade schools and community colleges are not less important than a four-year degree. So they're a wonderful opportunity for many. So this slideshow, it shows the cost savings of attending a community college and transferring to a four-year state university. The community colleges and public universities in Massachusetts have an articulation agreement called the Mass Transfer A to B degree, allowing students to transfer from a community college in Massachusetts to a state public university or a UMass school. So the Mass Transfer Education Foundation allows students to complete their general education requirements at the community college and transfer them to the state public university or UMass school. The A to B degree is an option for students to earn their associate's degree at a community college and then transfer to a four-year public university in Massachusetts, allowing the student to complete their education in 4 years. A to B allows up to 60 credits to be transferred to the public university or UMass school. Many students pursue the A to B degree through the Commonwealth Commitment. With the Commonwealth Commitment, if a student has earned at least a 3.0 with their associate's degree, tuition and mandatory fees do not increase while the student is enrolled in school. There are several other perks, including automatic admission, along with admission fee being waived when transferring to the Massachusetts Public University or UMass school. So there are many advantages to the mass transfer program. Your student may not, whoops, sorry. I'm like talking a lot about this slide, but we really want to highlight the mass transfer opportunity. So even if they want to go to a private community college, honestly, there are transfer counselors at community colleges that can help with your student going from the community college over to a public or even private school after the 2-year. So I would actually really recommend using this link on the slide. It's fun to play around with the different colleges. Like you can put Quincy Community College and then transfer to Worcester State or Quincy to Framingham State. So you can look at the different numbers, which is very helpful through this process. And now financial aid. So there are several types of financial aid. The first are scholarships. Scholarships are financial aid that does not need to be repaid. They may have specific requirements such as grade point average, talents, or career interests. Some scholarships have a writing component, so we just want you to be mindful of that. In October, if your child has earned qualifying scores on the MCAS exam, they will find out if they're eligible for either the John and Abigail Adams Scholarship or the Stanley Koplik Certificate of Mastery, also known as the Koplik Scholarship. So in March, you will receive information about local scholarships that we have in Franklin that your student can apply for. And then in May, we have a really special night for the scholarship night, and it awards those who did receive the local scholarships. And then Naviance is a great tool, so please be mindful of that because we also use that for adding scholarships. Grants are another form of financial aid. Similar to scholarships, they are free aid. Work study is a different type of aid whereby students are able to work at the college campus part-time, which allows students to help pay for college. So the amount varies based on the college, the amount of aid that the student is eligible for, and then when it's applied for. Then there are loans, so those have to be repaid. and not only include what is borrowed, but also interest. So that's just something to be mindful for. Now we're going to get into the forms. So just one thing to keep in mind too is that there are financial aid counselors out there. So as guidance counselors, we don't do the financial aid counseling, but we do have some information about the forms, but financial aid counselors at the colleges, and then MIFA, which I'll be explaining a little bit more about, is another form of another resource as well. So the first one is the FAFSA. So for those of you who currently or previously had students in college, please note there are going to be some changes regarding the FAFSA. The big one is that it's expected to be available on January 1st instead of October 1st, which is what it has been in the most recent years. Now, mind you, previous to today, they were expecting for it to come out in December. So we're hopeful that it's January, but as of today, it will be available on January 1st. And then another big change in FAFSA is the amount of money that parents are expected to contribute is not going to be divided by how many children are attending college, whereas in previous years it was. So that's a real big one. FAFSA is going to continue to use prior year for financial information. So this means that for students enrolling for the 2024 to 2025 school year, tax information from 2022 will be used. So the CSS profile, that one's just a different form that some private colleges and other colleges may use. So just check the college's websites for financial aid required forms, just to make sure that you have all the forms that are required for financial aid. So again, whoops, sorry, I talk a lot, so I apologize. So just again, the financial aid counselors are going to be great resources to use. Now, we'll talk about MIFA. So the Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority, also known as MIFA, provides a vast variety of information about college planning, including financial aid. MIFA provides information regarding financial aid applications and the types of financial aid available. Information on the site is given regarding the factors that determine your aid eligibility and how colleges determine the amount of aid that they offer students. There are some upcoming webinars and pre-recorded webinars along with a MIFA podcast on their site. So there are many different opportunities to learn more about the college planning and financial aid process. And then this is just a list of some of the upcoming webinars, but there are many more on the site, and there are some that are in different languages as well. So it's really nice. On the next slide, so we've attached some websites that are great resources. One of the sites that we have not discussed yet is FinAid. So this website has a vast array of information related to financial aid. And then there's FastWeb. So that's a scholarship search engine. Just please be mindful that scholarships, they often have application deadlines and may have some writing supplements involved as well. So it may be helpful to sit down with your child and set some days that they'll be able to sit down and apply for scholarships. And then, like Ms. Horner had mentioned, the net price calculators. So please definitely use those. So you can put your financial aid information in. And then you'll get a better understanding of what you're going to have to pay for that college. So please definitely use the net price calculators. And then the web resources. So these are just some websites that you and your child will become familiar with this year with admissions, testing, and athletics. And so I'm going to actually hand the presentation over to Ms. McVeigh.
So thanks, everyone. I'm not really great at multitasking. I'm trying to take notes, monitor the PowerPoint. So Abby, I apologize. I was a step ahead of you there for a couple. So thank you once again for attending. We hope you found this night helpful. We, as everyone has mentioned, are more than happy to answer questions that you might have. We've included a form here where we would ask that you submit any general questions you have. I don't see anything on the chat, but again, I haven't been monitoring that. So it looks like we'll focus just on this form. We as a team will sit down and answer those questions and post that to our website. I would ask if you have a very specific question that's individualized for your own student that you just reach out to your student's guidance counselor. It'll be more productive and probably more informative for you. As I mentioned, this has been recorded. So over the next few days, I will download it and add that to our website. Additionally, the presentation for tonight will be on the website so that you have access to all the helpful links to guide you through this process. So again, thanks again for joining us, and reach out if you have any questions. Take care.